Welcome to Atlanta Solar Zen Center. This is our Thursday Zen Talk. Doesn't matter to you that it's Thursday if you're just picking us up online, but we'd like to invite you to join us on Thursdays where it's live streamed to Mixer, I believe. We go to Facebook and
Mixer and Facebook.
Mixer and Facebook. The rest of our programs at the Atlanta Solar Zen Center, you can look us up online at www.ascc.org and see our regular program of sitting meditation, retreats, and things of that nature, typical of most Zen centers. The Zen Talk is a little bit unusual. What we're trying to do is help you see all the different kinds of people who come to Zen and why they do. There are lots of choices out there today, a lot of competing voices around meditation, and we think Zen is unique, uniquely simple for one thing, and uniquely capable, you might say, or designed to fit into lay practice, practice for the rest of us, you might say. We're not monastic. I'm a priest, trained as a priest, and we do have professional or the formal practice path so that people who are inclined that way can become disciples and priests and become ordained in our lineage. But we agree with Matsuo Roshi, my teacher, that the future of Zen is lay practice. And he came from Japan, of course, 1939, Matsuo Roshi. And he said the future of Zen is in America. And so we're trying to illustrate how broad-based the appeal of Zen is and all the different kinds of people who come to practice Zen, who seek it out. And tonight we're blessed, not a word we use often in Zen, to have a special guest. Apriel has been practicing with us for some time, and she's going to have quite a story to tell us, I think. Apriel Jessup-Searcy. So welcome, Apriel.
Thank you.
And I'd like to start with just asking you to tell us a little bit about what you do for a living, your unique background. Later on, we'll get into how you came to meditation practice and how you found us. But for now, just tell us a little bit about who you are. We'd like to get to know you better.
Yeah, my name is Apriel Jessup-Searcy. Was raised in Kentucky, born on the farm. My dad's military, retired out of Fort Campbell. So I grew up on a farm and everything that comes with. Went to school. Well, me and him had he'd always kind of leave little notes on the table in the morning because he was just like, oh, I want you to go into a profession that you'd kind of like always have a job, always have some security, something to fall back on. And I was interested in like engineering. He was just not feeling that, of course. And
what kind of farm, by the way?
It was we do tobacco, peppers, a little bit of everything. My uncle still farmed dairy. They're dairy farmers. So we did a little bit of everything.
Yeah, real farm. I grew up on a very small farm. We had basically horses.
Yeah. So I mean, functioning. Yeah, and they're still. My dad's 80. My mom is 73. They're still really active. People on the farm. I think you die out of it. So he'd leave little notes on the table about, oh, what about nursing? So I'm like, oh, okay. So I ended up majoring in nursing. Went to Louisville and got into nursing, and then found that I really, really enjoyed it because it's something that's really assisting and helping people.
So you were in Kentucky, and where did you go to school for nursing?
University of Louisville.
Louisville, Kentucky, yes.
I'm sorry I said Louisville. I know it's like Louisville. Yeah, so I did that, and then really wanted to get into neuro, like the ICU, and so I moved to Atlanta.
Explain the ICU.
An intensive care unit. Really working with the machines and people that are really, sick, and then by the time they are talking or they're ready to roll out into the floor. So I did that, and actually it was a waiting list in Kentucky before I was able to get in. So I moved to a smaller town, got like a year's worth of service under my belt, and then was able to get a job at the neurology ICU in Emory. So I did that. I moved down to Atlanta.
Is that what brought you to Atlanta?
That's what brought me to Atlanta. So shortly after, I saw a nurse wandering around and asked her what she was doing, and she was doing case management and information system nursing. So I got curious and transitioned out of that and went into like insurance, and that's where I kind of got the final laugh on my dad because I did my master's degree in health information systems. So it's kind of merging the medical and the technology together.
Yeah.
So I
So-
ended up coming full circle.
So you have several things to fall back on.
Yeah, definitely. It's fun. I like serving and helping people and seeing them along their health
Yeah.
continuum. So,
I grew up in a musical family. My dad had a jazz band in the 40s, and my brother was like a prodigy. My older brother, 4 years old, he was playing piano. And so my dad was very happy, but then he was very worried that he wouldn't have something to fall back on.
right. That's a thing for that generation, I think.
That's
Yeah.
a double-edged sword.
Mhm.
Well, tell us a little bit about your first inkling of any interest in meditative pursuits and so forth, how that came about.
Right.
Where were you at the time? What was going on?
So I was in Atlanta, and I was throwing this back and forth with my wife, and she was just like, "You're interested in meditation?" So she was driving by in Decatur and saw this meditation center and said, "Oh, why don't you check that out?" And
Decatur.
in Decatur, yeah, it's on Church Street. So I stopped at that center and took a meditation class, and I just stayed there for like 10 or 11 years because I kept going back. I didn't really understand why that working with my mind was really something. It was always something. I couldn't quite put my head on it, but it was just kind of, it was making a difference in my life. And I just kept showing up and taking classes and doing different levels and kind of knowing.
So you've been doing that for about 10 years.
Yeah,
And that was the Shambhala Center?
it was a Shambhala Center.
Did you know they used to be here?
I did not until you told me
They
that.
used to be in this
Yeah,
building.
it's quite coming full circle here. It's
I was
really,
invited for an ecumenical service where our group performed the Heart Sutra the way we do in our service, and everybody else was doing something else. And I thought this will make a great Zen center. So eventually, here we are.
Oh yeah.
Could I ask you to bring me the clock? So, so then, without going into all the details, how did you find your meditation practice fitting into your daily life and your work? And then how did you find out about us?
Okay, so I, again, started taking the levels and really, I probably would say I really got serious about 4 years ago because I kept going to the different programs and I, kept learning and I did a lot of study external Shambhala just because I really wanted to know classically about Buddhist practices and teachings. So really, really got serious and really started to integrate into my life. So you show up, you keep coming, you kind of on and off practice. But when I started really getting myself to sit on the cushion every day for a designated period of time and seeing how it flowed into every aspect of my life, it slowed me down enough to be able to really, and I'll say this a lot, really respond and not react. It just gives me enough space in that. So I started, in about that time, really, I had a lot of weight on me too, about 120 pounds more than right now. So what I really started to see is, to notice that I wasn't really hungry. When I was eating, I was just stress eating. So, I mean, it really, when I say it permeated every aspect of my life, I got slower, I started, really moving more. I started not needing as much food. I started figuring out I'm just eating just because I think I'm supposed to, not because of when I'm hungry. So I really started noticing how and what I was doing in just response to things and not really thinking about doing it out of habit. So I really started to see the shift in that when I really started to really get into my practice.
This is one of the things we often say about daily life. We, especially in our culture, Matsuoka Roshi, my teacher, would say civilization conquers us. So busy, so demanding, so many things to do, so many pressures. When you said you took a lot of weight off, I thought you meant that kind of weight pressure.
All of it, literally.
As well, and physically as well. So people often report that one of the first things they notice is they feel a little calmer. And we are very careful about making claims, around what you can expect. But because frankly, the biggest group of people who practice meditation, especially Zen, in the West, are those who quit too soon. And so I think we have to be very careful about developing expectations in people's minds. But we have to concede that, it's certainly going to help in all those different dimensions. Now, maybe you can give us a couple of examples out of your career and life, your daily life, where before you saw this effect setting in, what, without all the gory details, what were a couple of situations that you had difficulty with handling, and which now maybe you don't see in the same light,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
And I think for me, I have to ask my wife, and she's one because I ask her all the time, like, do you notice the difference? And she's like, oh yeah. So when we first were together, we would just argue about crazy stuff. It was just like why are we even arguing? Like, yeah. And now it's like even before it goes there, we're just like, oh, this could be, interesting, but we don't even go there anymore because it's like we kind of recognize like, oh, we need to have a conversation instead of a screaming match. That's one huge things. And she'll say that my ability to listen and to hear her has significantly changed. So every time I'd go on retreat or when I'd come back, I'd be exponentially able to just hear and not react to what I think she said and actually hear what she actually
We've had
said.
a lot of people come, guys in particular, and say that their wife suggested that they come back. Because
Yeah, right. Right. I mean, and it is for me. It had to be a direct experience with the practice instead of from the book because I am heady. I like to logical. I'm like have been called Spock. Really,
yes.
really analytical
I can
about
see
a lot
that.
of things. But and I feel more. I feel in my body. I'm slow enough to actually for things to actually permeate me, and I'm not just keeping the distance from it. So,
Because it goes back to the Buddhist model of the mind. We have in Sanskrit chitta, discriminating mind, bodhi, wisdom mind, and so forth. So we think of these, this is a way of characterizing the duality of the mind. Like the peripheral and central vision, they're not really in opposition to each other, but balanced, they complete the whole of the mind, bodhicitta.
Yeah.
But none of us in our culture and society were educated and trained really away from intuition and toward analysis, right? You get the good grades, you get the good jobs.
Oh, yeah.
That's
We're rewarded heavily for that.
Yeah, that's the way you compete.
Yeah.
So it's not all your fault.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your first contact with the Atlanta Soto Zen Center. Think back to the day, the very first time you came. Tell us a little bit about what was going on in your life and what brought you here, and then what you experienced and what has brought you back.
So my old Sangha has been going through a lot of challenges related to teacher and misconduct, trust and ethics issues. And I was further enough along my path to really understand that, ethically, everything's from the way we practice is based in ethics. And it got to the place to where I wasn't, I couldn't consciously be there anymore. So I took time to really do research and to look around to different sanghas. I took, checked out Japan, I checked out different places, but I had always been drawn to Zen because Shambhala had a lot of aspects of Zen in it. The things that I loved the most about Shambhala were very Zen. It was the Ikebana, it was the Kudo. Am I saying that correctly? The archery.
Kudo.
Kudo. Yes. The sitting in silence and walking. That unbeknownst to me, because I hadn't been outside of that particular organization, were really aspects that were taken from Zen. So I started looking I found the Atlanta Soto Zen website, and I actually saw your email where you were responding to somebody on Google, and you had your email on there, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna reach out to this sensei and to just express my interest to see if this would be a place that I could actually be in a sangha, connect with, and sit in integrity. Because that's a big thing with me, being in integrity and being able to work with people, to practice and to grow and to learn and to just, to work together. And you immediately responded. And I showed up that Wednesday. Corolla, is that her? Corolla. She really educated us on the stance, the zazen.
So for the sake of the audience, Wednesday is our workshop which is a good time to come because it's an introduction, and you get, mm, unlike one of our regular sessions or retreats, you have more time to ask questions. And Wednesday is a good time. We recommend if you're interested in checking out Atlanta Soda Zen Center, come on Wednesday evening, 7:30.
Yeah.
So the first time you came was that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I met Corolla and Brennan, who's making Wednesdays. It's kind of like its own little baby sangha. I was just really felt welcomed and warmed, and we sat, and Corolla gave me the schedule, and so I showed up that Sunday. And then I, of course, have been harassing you through email, asking you a lot of questions because I came with a lot of questions like, what are y'all, how ethically are y'all? I mean, I'm sure you were probably like, oh, this one's special. But I wanted to know. I mean, I wanted to know,
like the enthusiasm.
how the Sangha was, I mean, if it was going to be cool for me to come.
Well,
so.
the issues that you ran into are known issues all across the spectrum. We've had mutinies on the bounty here. We've had disgruntled students and boards of directors that got bent out of shape and so forth. So it's this is the first 50, 100 years in America, which somebody said the first 100 years are always the hardest, right? So we're going through growing pains, basically. And I think many of the traditions that come to us from the East, from the countries of origin, don't quite patch on to the Western culture. I think Matsuoka Roshi was kind of a genius in understanding this. If you read his books, the Kyosaku Mokurai, the collection of his talks, you could see how he talked to Westerners in a second language, English, about Zen, which is a very Eastern thing, and at least at that time, back in the 50s and 60s and so on. Now it's more mainstream. But nonetheless, some of the cultural memes from the old countries, I don't think quite float here. That's what we're struggling with. We're trying to find the best balance around how we can do pretty formalized practice and yet allow it to fit into people's daily lives. So tell us a little bit about how that's going for you now. It has been too soon, I think, too short a time for you to notice any major differences since you've been here, but maybe you can illustrate for the audience a few of the things that you like about the practice here, characteristics of it.
I love that you sit in silence. I love the chanting. I love the walking, the mixture. For me, we talked about this on Sunday, that discipline really does bring joy, even though you would not think that way. But for me, it's very important in my life to have the balance of the practice and the way of being in my life. So for me, when I come here, I know, again, I can, read book practice on book practice on Mondays, and then I can, be online on Tuesdays, and I'm getting the benefit of practitioners that have been practicing for a long time. And it's good to see that, and just in the way that the Sangha is, from our younger Sangha members are actually residential, being with them and interacting with them, their way of being, I'm learning from them as well. I'm hoping I'm bringing some stuff to them as well. But I mean, it's an immense sense of community and support. And the one thing that I did notice when I came here is that it's like the history and the lineage is very profound. And when I say that, I mean you've done a lot of work to bring the teaching forward, and the teaching is so rich in that it brings it with a simplicity that it speaks to the now. And that's kind of the benefit that I'm getting.
And what makes you feel that in this particular case, maybe some examples of how the teaching is rich and profound? I notice that you show up at most of the talks and the dialogues that we have.
Because what I'm hearing, the contemporary talks, of how you bring Zen into the now, like really, how am I being in my life? Like on the Monday group that we talked about, we were reading Clover. We talked about the non-killing, and we had, we were talking about, we had one of our members talk about working with, animal testing, and and working with how, shifting the whole practice of how cattle cattle are put down, like just being in those situations noticing and being different and bringing your practice in those situations make a difference.
I think going back to
So-
what you said about ethics, you think you feel that practice is basically ethical. And Dogen said something interesting along those lines. Master Dogen is a 13th century founder of Soto Zen in Japan. He said, sitting in Zazen, what precept is not fulfilled?
Mm.
Now, if you think of us as just sitting there, navel gazing, you know, self-indulgent, wasting our time,
Yeah.
and so forth, you can have some pretty negative attitudes, you know, about what meditation is. But anybody who thinks that's what it is hasn't done it much.
Mm-hmm.
And once you have been practicing for some time, you begin to see yourself in what we call the mirror of Zen. So you begin to see your own faults.
Mm-hmm.
And this, I think, is the sort of the heart of the training in Zen.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you go out and do good works
Mhm.
or whatever, I don't, to my way of thinking, that's an individual choice.
Mhm.
Everybody, you know, who practices,
Mhm.
first of all, is doing something different. It looks the same, but they're at a different stage of their practice. They're a different place and time of life and so forth. We have young people in their before 20s and their mid 20s, mid 30s, all the way up to people like myself in 60s, 70s, and 80s who are practicing this way. So our idea, at least mine, around the ethical premise is not that we should necessarily represent Zen as engaging in causes, although we're generally for world peace, right? A lot of these are very unobjectionable, but some of them, you get into politics and you get into two sides to every story. So we're hesitant to associate Zen as such with a given cause. But our cause is for people such as yourself to have the opportunity to come to your own resolution of your own life. And then we're confident that you will do the right thing as the situation arises. So it's a little bit different, I think, from some more socially engaged forms of practice. Tell us a little bit about that. How do you feel about that?
Social engagement, and I go back to something that I read from Pema Chodron, to where she was looking at two groups. You had one people that were against and the people that were for, and they kind of looked, the crowd looked the same. So you have to figure out, you know, from the place from which you're working from, your intent. And for me, the practice really allows me to be able to discern on what to do in that situation. And for me, it's like you said, it's trying to figure out, you know, what is for me to do and what is for me not to do. And I think that's something that I'm constantly asking myself, however that shows up.
Right. And if we try to inculcate that in the membership or dictate or say we should all be for this or against that, I think we miss the point of Zen. The point of Zen is that we trust the human nature, Buddha nature, awakened nature, and the potential for everybody to recover this nature, in which case they will be exercising compassion, wisdom, etc. But I don't think it's our role to try to impose that.
Yeah, and you said that that's innate, already existing, connecting in. It's there already. It's not something we have to go and get. And I think we talk about this all the time. It's the practice in that you recognize that.
Yeah, our practice is to recover it.
Yes.
We can't really create it.
Yeah.
So before we turn to questions from the audience, tell us a couple things. One, what would you say to people who are listening who do not practice? What would you say to people who are listening, maybe doing some other kind of practice, yogic meditation or some other form? Any kind of advice or recommendations you would give them around that?
And for me, like, again, it's like the Oxfording pictures. It's like you see the evolution.
The Oxford pictures. Yes.
It's like when you see the evolution of the mind. So people are going to find what they're needing at the time that they need it. And if you're finding it hard to be able to show up on the cushion, you just have to make a decision just to do it. And then you have to decide to really be consistent with it, because that's through consistency is where I have found, and I'm only speaking on my personal experience, that I have found that, you know, that it continues to evolve into the next level.
Right.
And so show up, make a decision, show up and sit.
I would push back on that a little bit. I would say to our audience, don't worry too much about consistency at this point, but show up.
Yeah, there you go.
And people can show up to our Thursday night ZENtalk and they don't have to sit in meditation. People can come listen to our Dharma talks and so forth. So I think people can dip their toe in the shallow end of the pool, and that's what. And once they do that, then I think, like yourself, they probably gain a little more confidence that I think I have found the right place. And then we have retreats that are designed to give them a day-long experience, or half a day, day-long, and week-long, so that they can gradually work their way into the deep end of the pool.
And see, that's the thing that I like the most. It is like wherever people are along the path, they're supported. And one of the, for me, what was important was really connecting with other people, because that supports the practice.
Yep.
And that's why, I was at the point where I was, continue to meditate, solitary, but it makes a difference when you're amongst people that are there with you.
Yep. The Sangha means harmonious community.
Yeah.
And we're not always harmonious, but we do our best. So before we turn to questions, one more thing. Can you, is there anything else we haven't talked about, something you'd like to sort of say in conclusion about where you're at and how you're practicing?
I mean, I sit in gratitude to have found a place to where I can really engage with the community and continue to learn and practice. And that's all I ask, for. And I guess when the teacher's ready, when the student's ready, the teacher will appear, or the Sangha will appear. So things sometimes you don't know why they happen, but usually there's a reason and a purpose, and if you can just allow yourself to be in the moment, to really discover what that is. And so that's where I'm at, and I'm in gratitude for the Sangha and to teaching.
We're glad
So I
you're
really
here.
appreciate it.
So let me turn to the audience and see if anybody has any question for our guest tonight, for Apriel.
So what do you want to get out of Zen?
And that's the thing that I am really, I ask myself, and I'm working with, because I've just been talking to ZENku online about really being, practicing with no expectation. And that's something I'm just now getting into. It's like when I sit on the cushion, not having any expectation, but to just sit. So that's something I'm kind of working on right now. The not wanting or trying to grasp for anything, but just sitting.
So Zenku Jerry Myers. He's one of our priests, and he has been leading discussion on Tuesday nights, which is a book reading group, and that's another program that you can join from home. And again, the shallow end of the pool, it's a little heavy sometimes, right? But nonetheless, it's a way that people can engage and check us out and see if this is really what they want to invest more time in or not, investigate more fully. Anyone else?
So I've heard you talk a few times, not just today, but in recent times since I've known you, about this space. Would you refer to that maybe as like a buffer area?
For me, it's almost, I would say it's in slow motion. So where, for me, it's, okay, for instance, I'll use my kind of like a conversation with my wife we've had several times. So we'll be talking about something. In the past, I might have, totally taken it off to the left into grandma's house in the back end, when she didn't really even say that, because I wasn't there and present and listening. So now it's like I feel like I'm able to really hear, because I'm not already imposing my preconceived stuff in it. So when I say that, it's more like I'm able to just kind of be with what it is and not go down the road into grandma's house again. Does that make sense? It's just, it gives me like,
killing.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Anyone else?
I'll ask a question. I relate to everything you said because my experience has been very much the same. Can you share like your spirituality prior to Zen, your religion, that this in fact kind of embraced as well?
Yeah, definitely. I was raised Southern Baptist. My grandmother, who's 94 years old, still plays for Corinth Baptist Church. And in that moment of study, and practice, I mean, I look back on it and I'm so in gratitude because they were so embrace that. I mean, you can feel it and see it, that energy. And I got to college, and I always had the problem with the women, the Southern Baptist women, not being able to walk on the pulpit. That's a problem because I'm like, the 80% of the church is women, and I'm like, that's an issue for me. So I was just like, okay. And then I went to college and took my first women's and religion studies class, and I was like, oh wow, there's like more stuff. So from that, I went into religious science or Centers for Spiritual Living, because it was just so open and it was not so constraining. So it's more like a metaphysical kind of open, but again, different road stop on the way. And then I really connected with Buddhism, and that I knew that's what it was for me. However, I still love and can appreciate all different aspects because I feel like people connect with whatever resonates with them, getting to similar places. So, and then, but I still stayed I got my religious science practitionership in religious science and CSLs. And that's more like, I guess it would be like a deacon or, like somebody that can work doing affirmations and prayers. But when I got connected with Buddhism, I knew that was my thing. So whatever else that I do, I knew that my spiritual path was Buddhism. I knew it innately, just like.
So you were exposed to Buddhism before you started practicing, before you came to Atlanta? So
No, when I got to Atlanta,
when you got here?
When I got to Atlanta, yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah.
In you may not know this, just a factoid. In American Zen, we have a lot of women priests, and many people may not realize this. I don't know if it's 50-50, but I think in general, I don't think we have the issue of gender disparity in terms of leadership. And the history of Zen, of course, came from patriarchal countries in the Far East. So what were expressed as ethical aspirations and so forth were not always manifested, obviously, in the in the implementation. But Dogen pointed out, Fasiko Kodrai Tokuzui, prostration to the attainment of the marrow. If a 7-year-old girl is a Dharma holder, we prostrate to that person. And you read that, if you read that one, it's from the 13th century, but it sounds like he's writing about gender equality today. So Buddhism at least has this ideal. And I think what it's based on, if you look at the iconography, you see that they look basically androgynous. The statues compared, say, to Hindu statues in India before Buddhism, the Buddhist statuary and iconography paintings are all, relatively androgynous. And it's because the Buddha nature is not gendered. Buddha nature is not constrained to any of these dualistic characteristics. So let's see if we have one more question. I have time for one more.
Did I answer your?
Yeah, I mean, I was just kind of curious on, is there still a relationship with Christianity that you
I have a lot of friends that are ministers and practitioners, and I support them kind of doing technology stuff, but that's my side business. But there's a respect for that. But that's not my primary path is Buddhism. And that's what resonates with me. But I respect and can relate to other people's experiences.
We have done a lot of interfaith work, and there was an interesting question. One of the guys at one of our conferences was asked, do you really feel if you have Christians and Buddhists talking together, can there be a genuine interfaith dialogue? And he said, no. He said, as long as there are Christians and Buddhists, no dialogue. So in Buddhism, we say spit when you say Buddha. It doesn't capture what it is, but you're talking about your path of Buddhism. That's not the same as self-identity as a Buddhist. Right? If I self-identify as a Buddhist, then I have differentiated and separated myself from a Christian.
That's right.
It doesn't make any sense to us. Jesus is considered bodhisattva, enlightened being
definitely
in Buddhism. So we have open arms to embrace all these ideas. So anyone else? One more?
I was wondering if you could speak about the program that you're enrolled in, the
the spiritual program?
Yeah, I'm finishing up because I started it um it's the Emerson Theology School. It's a kind of a doctoral in spiritual studies. So they know I primarily study Buddhism, so it kind of opens me up to be able to work with if I ever choose to go into like chaplaincy programs and work with people, because one of the populations I love to work with are homeless people and women, disenfranchised women that have had like challenges. So it kind of opens me up to be able to kind of work with those populations. Mhm.
So anything further tonight? Anyone? So any closing comments you'd like to make?
No, I just want to encourage folks to, if they so desire, practice however that is for them. And it has made a benefit in my life, and I am excited to be able to be here in this community and look forward to evolving and what's going to happen with the future.
Well, we're excited that you're here too.
Mhm.
Thank you, April.
Mhm.
And tune in again.
Mhm.
When?
Next Thursday.
Thursdays at 7:30.
Thursdays at 7:30. 7:30 to 8 is our ZENtalk show.
Mhm.
But please do check us out and come by the
Mhm.
Zen Center, get to know us.
Mhm.
I think you'll like the community here, the Sangha.
Mhm.
And however deep you want to go into Zen, you've come to the right place.